Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in.
Well, that's a perfect segue with our technical difficulties to talk about the state of technology. And this was interesting because this was the first blog post I read by you in a little bit that wasn't like super a techno optimist. You're usually like a staunch techno optimist, but you're also a realist. And so in this piece, I see you arguing for, hey, maybe tech doesn't have vistas of opportunity ahead of it in the same way that it did in decades past, because perhaps the internet is mature now. Why don't you flesh out this case, and then we'll have a discussion on it. I'll have some thoughts for you.
Yeah, well, I think one of the really key points of that post was that when we talk about tech, when we use the word tech, we don't mean technology as in like what technology can do, right? If we invent a new, a drug that can make you like, have X-ray vision or something, that's not actually counted as tech, right? If we make like better ways to, if GM comes out with like a better way to make a car engine, we don't count that as tech. That's technology. Like that's what an economist would call technology, right? But we don't count it as tech. And I think the reason is because it doesn't offer the possibility of large financial returns. And so I think when we talk about tech, it's an investing category more than a category of what technology can do. I think it's about where could you make money? Where can you plunk down a few dollars and then be like a centimillionaire, right? Make life-changing amount of money in not that fast of it, not that long of a time. I mean, so I think that when I talk about the future of tech, what I'm really talking about is the future of financial returns. Like, so I'm really optimistic and bullish about what tech can do, right? So, for example, a great example is solar, right? We don't even count solar as part of tech. I mean, I guess you counted Solar City because Solar City was finance, not tech, right? But it offered you a faster return than, say, manufacturing solar panels, right? And so we counted Solar City, which didn't actually have any technology to its name, as tech. And we count it because it was a financing company. It was a fintech company. And we count like First Solar not as tech, right? That's not tech. It's finance. It's all because of financial returns. Where can you make money? So tech is a shorthand we use for make money off something related to tech fast and in large quantities. And so that's what I'm really questioning in this post. And the idea is basically the internet age. Tech is still progressing. We've got, massive revolutions in like battery tech and energy stuff. We've got massive revolution in like AI. We've got massive revolutions in other, and we've got, smaller revolutions in other things like space, advanced manufacturing, robotics, what have you, right? And I think lots is going on, and bio stuff, just so much biotech around. So much is going on that I'm super optimistic about. But the internet is even the internet. I'm optimistic that we'll use the internet to do more remote work, and that companies shifting to remote will benefit from this, right? So I think that applications of the internet using technologies that we already have will be big. And so, but in terms of building out the actual internet, creating the internet itself, the platforms on which it runs, both hardware and software, I'm less, I think that we did it, like we succeeded. We built all the fiber optic cables on the 5G towers, or really 4G is good enough. 5G is very incremental. I guess Starlink's like kind of the last piece to get it like last mile. Almost everyone is wired up in like yes, there's some extremely poor people in extremely poor countries or not, but most people are. And so everybody's, online. We gave everybody the phones, and now everybody's got a supercomputer in the pocket all the time. And would changing to like contact lenses or even a direct brain to internet interface really be that big a difference from like looking at your phone screen constantly? I'm not sure. That would be a huge difference. In terms of software platforms, anyone can talk to anyone else anywhere in the world at any time, as long as they make themselves available. There's no physical barrier to communication of any bandwidth between anyone on the earth at any time. The dream of the old Bell AT&T has been fully realized, right? Everyone in the world is wired together now. It's done. And then everyone's always on the same platform. Like, we're getting to the point where people are having to go offline or go to small group, Discords or private chats or go offline just to get privacy from the fact that everyone's connected to everyone else. Like we're seeing the real world become an escape from the internet, as I like to say. And so to me, that says the internet itself is mature. Now, that doesn't mean there's not going to be any more good internet companies. There's good new clothing companies. There's good new tractor companies. There's good new companies in every single industry, right? But I think that because it's mature, there's going to be fewer. And when they happen, they're going to come at the expense of old stuff. It's going to be primarily disruptive. Primarily just higher quality replacing. Like, so Lululemon, right? Lululemon did not invent the idea of pants, right? In fact, you could argue they're not even selling real pants. But yeah, they did not invent the idea of pants, but they invented like a slightly better form of pants that people like a little bit better that displaced other form of pants, right? People won't wear capri pants. I don't know. People wear around. People won't wear this kind of pant. Instead, they'll wear a Lululemon pants, and it's slightly better. So I think that's the future, most of the future of the internet. I think there's some, there's a couple exceptions. Like, obviously AI could increase the demand for cloud computing services, and that keeps big tech going for a while. Anyway, that's the thesis. Internet is done, and then all other tech stuff, I think, has different cost structures, and so will offer a different profile of financial return. Right? You've got deep tech, which is like a huge amount of money up front. Unlike internet stuff. Internet, you can pay a few guys in the garage, they'll whip up a website, and then there you are. But then deep tech, you got to build a factory, big and real factory, right? It's expensive. AI has very high variable costs. Like you've got to, like, inference costs money. Any AI company, even like a AI application layer company, right, that's using AI and just built on top of the fundamental. I'm not even talking about just foundational models like OpenAI or Anthropic. I'm talking about like character AI, or like some application company is still paying for inference, and that inference is a variable cost, and that costs a lot of money. And so basically, and then crypto, whatever, blah blah. We can talk about that if you want. I just don't see a lot of things where you can like plunk down a little tiny amount of money and then like just become a bazillionaire off the next Facebook very easily upcoming. So that's my.
Yeah, no, I think it's a strong case of realism from no opinion. The Lindy Man has this term called refinement culture, which I thought about when you were talking about the pants. And refinement culture is kind of this idea that when sort of industries are mature, there's only like very small incremental benefits that can be made. And I think we see this pretty strongly in consumer social, where the search space has been explored of, for example, all different dating apps. Like everything's been tried, and we have all these different niche dating apps that are emerging. And so to have a new dating app,
someone will make a better dating app at some point. Like it just, it won't be such a game changer. I don't know.
Right. And this is why, we used to have a new big consumer hit like every few years, Facebook and Twitter and Snap and TikTok. But when's the last one we had? Like, I don't know, it's consumer social is pretty mature. It's also, it's pretty hard for a startup to take in that space.
Right. I think so. And I think that this is connected to my argument that time of day was the resource that consumer social was always, consumer internet in general, not even social, but including search, was always, and also smartphones, right? The physical substrate thereof. I think consumer social or consumer internet, including hardware and software, was always mining out your time of day, right? People used to have these times of like, they'd just be like, I'm bored. That doesn't exist anymore. That extra time of day has been used. Your commute has been mined out. Your, breaks at your office have been mined out. In fact, people are probably taking too many breaks to check their social media now. And so I think that the time of day, like people are spending 6 hours, 7 hours a day on the internet now. That's a lot, and it can't get much higher. You gotta sleep and poop and whatever. I do your actual work anyway. So, and then hopefully go on some like IRL dates, you Zoomers. I'm talking to you. But yeah, so like it's been mined out, and that means that new things will have to cannibalize the old things. So like TikTok minutes will replace Snapchat minutes of your day, but ultimately, like the minutes are still the same. And in fact, there's even an economics argument that one reason why consumer internet boosted productivity not that much was because business internet boosted productivity a lot, but consumer internet not that much. And one reason is because before that you had TV and books and like real life conversations, and it wasn't actually that much worse. In fact, for some people, it's probably better. And so, we had things we were doing with those minutes before instead of just sitting there going, I'm bored. Like the I'm bored thing was very occasional. And, in the commute thing, you could listen to music or you could people watch, you could do stuff that was not as good, right? But not so bad. Like I were listening to the radio in my car commute, right? Back in the day, instead of listening to a podcast was just about as good. I remember listening to the radio in my car a long time ago. And so like, yeah. Anyway, I guess that I'm agreeing. Like that's
And so I definitely agree with you as it relates to consumer social. And I even think on SaaS applications too, we've had, 10, 15 years of thousands and more startups iterating in every possible way. And SaaS is becoming mature too. That said, Mark Andreessen, famously said, software is eating the world. And software ate the part of the worlds, the easy worlds. It ate the stuff that didn't require dealing with regulators. But when we think about like how much has school changed since we were in elementary school in terms of like the underlying technology, like how much has software really penetrated education? How much has software really penetrated healthcare? Like there are industries where it's been very difficult to innovate to the extent that is possible.
I mean, like education, everyone does their homework online, looks up everything online, like keeps in contact with their classmates online, like online portals for every single thing in education. Like, yeah, switching to MOOCs didn't work, right? Like online classes weren't as good as in-person classes. Maybe we'll fix that with AI, but like, I feel like tech is like IT has penetrated, the internet has penetrated education a lot. I don't know.
It's moved online in the way that like, in a skeuomorphic way, like, we put a magazine online or something. The internet hasn't like fundamentally reshaped education. So, and it will do that once AI gets good enough where, we can give people one-on-one tutoring in the Bloom Sigma problem idea that people learn much, much better via one-on-one tutor. Like then maybe we can sort of reshape how we think about education, not just help, the existing system just be a bit more efficient.
I think that's true, and I think that's a technological thing. Like we tried MOOCs. No regulator outlawed MOOCs, right? Stanford put all its classes online, and MIT put all its classes online, and you could take them, and then it was easy to learn to code online, but then it just turned out technologically that wasn't nearly as good as direct instruction in a classroom. It's just, but the tutoring thing is probably, again, AI tutoring will probably be better. Like we know that one-on-one tutoring just is fundamentally better than even small group classes, just by a huge amount. And every tutor knows this too. But the research shows this. And so I think that, yeah, AI will technologically, fix this. But I think that in terms of, could you put it online? We put everything online that we could, and some of those things worked and some of those things didn't work,
Right. And so that's why I say technology hasn't reshaped education yet. And I think you're right to say, hey, that's not just the regulator's fault. MOOCs actually just didn't really change the game, which is why one reason why we haven't had a ton of change recently is people have been waiting for the next platform shift, and they hoped it was crypto or they hoped it was something else. And it seems like AI is the great big hope now, because we have a supercomputer in our pocket where we can play games, we can look up anything, we can go on social media. But what the promise of AI is that we'll have like a doctor in our pocket, or a lawyer in our pocket, or a tutor in our pocket that's better, or as good at least, as the best human you can find in a way that's customized to you and always on, et cetera. So that's my hope.
Yeah, no, I'm really hopeful. Like I said, I am absolutely optimistic about tech progress, actual technology's ability to continue to solve, big problems that are unsolved now. And, tutoring is one of those. It's just one of many, but it will be a big one. And I think that, AI is already proving to be very, very useful in like diagnoses, reading stuff, and basically medical stuff too. Regulation is a lot more bigger of a problem in healthcare than education. And so I think that will be a big deal. Regulation will in healthcare. But I think that we'll deal with that pretty well. I think we'll allow all kinds of like AI medicine kind of stuff. Already telemedicine's become really important. Like telemedicine's huge. Using the internet is huge. And so we've cut out the time cost of like going to the doctor, and we'll reduce rents as clinic sizes shrink, et cetera. So I think that that's been good. It's just that I guess my argument is not that tech, even stuff that we call tech, won't continue to solve big problems. It's that the financial returns available may be different. So if you're paying for an AI tutor, every time your AI tutor talks to you, it's gonna, it's what Rune says. He always calls it lighting a pile of GPUs on fire. When he shows you what OpenAI can do, he's like, well, it's lighting a pile of GPUs on fire to do that. And no, it's not literally true, but inference costs money. Chips burn out. Electricity is a thing. It's not just training these models.
Is it possible those cost structures will change over time?
That inference will be cheap itself? Maybe. Oh, also, by the way, since models frequently get updated, maybe at some point we'll stop having to train new models, and we'll just have a good model that works that we just keep using. So we only have to like lightly retrain it instead of like heavily constantly retrain it. So maybe that cost structure will change. But and then you'll have to amortize less, right? Remember, the price you pay for things is not just the variable cost; it's the amortized fixed cost. But yeah, so I think that also, will variable cost change? That's a technological question, but I think that people were so used to thinking software equals free that it's very difficult for them to get out of that mindset. But the fundamental reason why software was free. There's two fundamental reasons why software was effectively free. And those reasons are both going away. The first reason is that ultimately the amount of information that humans want to communicate with each other, to yell at each other on Twitter, or even to send a video, is small. Like even a Netflix movie is not that much information. And so you're dealing with information rather than, energy. Like, it turns out that intelligence, or whatever pseudo-intelligence we have now, it turns out that intelligence is a lot more resource costly than information. And that's something I think people haven't mentally dealt with. They sort of assume that will go away. But it's a fundamentally different thing than human talking to human. Machine thinking for itself and human talking to human are just fundamentally different processes of the universe. And I think the second reason is Moore's law. We got used to this idea that computation gets much cheaper every year, right? And I think that computation is still getting cheaper, but Moore's law has reverted from the 1.5-year doubling that it held for 3 decades to the two-year doubling that Moore originally predicted. And people have sort of fudged it and said, well, it's still Moore's law because 2 years is what Moore predicted. Well, but yeah, it's a little more than 2 years now. And so Moore's law is slowing down. Like, that fundamental technological progress is slowing down now. And of course, you could get other shit, big breakthroughs that happen that could make computing a lot more cheap. And I can't predict those, right? Even quantum AI, I don't know. It's like, I don't have reasons to say that won't happen. I mean, I hear some reasons from physicist friends why it might not happen, but I'm not really, even despite being a physics major, I'm not prepared to really evaluate the technical stuff. So yeah, maybe, but I don't see any obvious reason why AI thinking is going to suddenly become cheap.
We'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
The less your business spends, the more margin you keep. But today, everything costs more. So smart businesses are graduating to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one proven platform, helping you reduce IT costs, maintenance costs, and manual errors. Over 37,000 companies have already made the move to NetSuite. Backed by popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible financing program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/102. That's netsuite.com/102. The argument I'm most sympathetic to, or that the returns won't be there, at least in the venture capital space, is that, especially with something like AI, is that incumbents are just so well positioned to capitalize on this platform shift, because they have the data, they have the teams, they have the technology, they've been working on it for a while, and so maybe the Microsofts, the Googles, the Amazons, the Apples, the Metas, et cetera, will just scoop up a lot of the returns. I think the opportunities for startups are things that those companies won't do, maybe because it's something with privacy, or it's something like AI dating, it's too risky, or it's in a highly regulated vertical like healthcare or law, or something that's way too specific for them. But yeah, that's my perspective there.
So wait a second. You've read, Christensen, right?
Yeah.
Sustaining versus disruptive innovation.
Yep.
So are you basically saying that you think AI will primarily be what Christensen calls a sustaining innovation, something that big companies can spend lots of money on and throw lots of, hired brains at to serve kind of their existing customers better and better, rather than, something that basically like Google was a disruptive innovation because it disrupted desktop stuff. Suddenly you could do stuff on the web, right? So it disrupted Microsoft in many markets. But that's an example of disruption. You find a new way to do something. It's cheaper and it's crappier at the beginning, which is why the big companies won't go for it. And so then the little companies go for it and they get the crappy little market, and then it expands to take over the big market eventually. And so that's disruption. But then are you saying that like AI progress is going to come from big, well-funded companies, can throw lots of money and brains at it?
Yeah. I'm saying AI is going to be sustaining in the way that mobile is sustaining, in the sense that when we look at the mobile sort of platform shift, we had Uber and Snap and some companies that got to 100 billion, but Meta got to a trillion. It served the incumbents even more than the startups, and I do think Microsoft's at 3 trillion now or something. I think it's going to grow bigger than maybe the whole startup ecosystem as it relates to AI. But I have no doubt we'll have $100 billion AI companies. We already do with OpenAI. But
how much is it? 80 billion now?
Yeah. Or I'm not sure the exact amount. It's around there. Yeah. But I think Anthropic and OpenAI and we'll have some big ones. But I think incumbents will just, I'd rather bet on FANG than all of venture capital. Which is sad as a venture capitalist.
That's really interesting. And it's also interesting that you say that mobile was actually sustaining innovation, because that's something that I guess I had thought of that a little bit, but I hadn't thought that much about it. You're right that we didn't get any big new companies, but let me push back on that for a second. We did get a couple, so Facebook, for example. When Facebook was just mostly on desktop, it couldn't really make any money, and everyone was saying Facebook will fail. And the reason Facebook got to $1 trillion was because of mobile ads, through Instagram, WhatsApp, and of course, even Facebook legacy platform. It was mobile ads that really got there. So I feel like Facebook was a disruptor in that sense. Facebook was a mobile native company.
Well, so I guess it depends how we use it. Facebook either disrupted itself, but Facebook existed well before mobile, right? But yeah. So mobile either sustained Facebook or Facebook disrupted itself.
But like Google would have been super successful had smartphones never existed. But I don't think Facebook would. Facebook would kind of be a niche thing that didn't make any money. Facebook might have been MySpace without mobile. But I agree that you don't see many.
It's possible. Yeah, that is possible. And the incumbents are better at kind of taking those bets these days, like Microsoft and OpenAI, right? Like Microsoft could have been IBM or something if they hadn't sort of taken these bold bets in the past decade.
That's true, and the most important bet so far has not been OpenAI yet. That may prove to be their most important bet, but so far it's been cloud. Azure's become a really formidable AWS competitor. Yeah, and so, but again, yeah. So I think even if you give Facebook to the mobile age, it hasn't been much, right? Like a lot of the money for mobile has come from Apple, Amazon, and Google, and Microsoft, I guess, a little bit with cloud, with Azure, indirectly.
By the way, it is crazy to me, or interesting to me, that e-commerce is what, 15% or 20%, or it still seems small to me. Like I wonder if that number is going to grow significantly. This is sort of the metaverse dream, right? It's kind of how we lived during COVID, where e-commerce, I think like doubled or something, and everyone was door dashing everything and on Zoom all the time, and like it was sort of simulating living in the metaverse because we couldn't go outside. But maybe at some point, when the headsets are out or the technology just gets so good that we're doubling, maybe not the amount of time because there's so much time in a day, but maybe the amount of money that we spend, on the internet. Like maybe instead of e-commerce or e-sports or like it'll just be, sports. Like that's the kind of the default way.
How much of retail is food?
Right.
I mean, like, going out to a restaurant is, I don't think DoorDash will ever be the norm. I mean, I assume we'll get little like delivery bots flooding through the streets at some point. When all the cars get automated and you can avoid a million little delivery bots, we're going to get the delivery bots. Like in China, they're already trying to do this, right? And it hasn't gone that well, but you can, in big Chinese cities, in certain areas, you can get a delivery bot. And then there's some, that high volume delivery bots will be very difficult to implement. But I think that at some point they will be. And then door dashing will become more popular. But then, yeah, like what are people buying in brick and mortar businesses? Like, food, yes, obviously, that's got to be a lot of it. A lot of like heavy stuff, I think, home appliances and, big electronics like TVs and things like that. Home furnishings. Yeah, maybe at some point we'll get like really good VR that'll allow people to like buy stuff. Although we're not going to get VR that lets you feel stuff soon. We'll get that someday, but not soon. But yes, like maybe, yeah, e-commerce. But the point is that e-commerce will always have to deliver stuff. It will always rely on delivery, and that really strains your infrastructure. So when you're talking about how much e-commerce can expand, I think a lot of it is how much delivery, like people, the different physical economics of people going to stores versus stores coming to people.
Maybe there's some commerce that will shift that won't involve delivery. Like instead of thinking about fashion or collectibles or, I mean, obviously you have to wear clothes, but we don't spend that much money on clothes or that much money on sort of all sorts of collectibles, or which I think 30 billion, I mean, no, it's got to be more, or all sorts of memorabilia or all sorts, like maybe a lot of that will just move on the internet and we'll have digital sort of avatars and like different ways of showing status.
Is a hotel e-commerce if you book online and then stay in the physical one?
I'm not sure.
That's interesting because like when you buy a belt online, that's e-commerce, even though the belt gets delivered in physical space. But when you go to a hotel and you make the reservation online and then you stay in the physical hotel, I don't think that's counted as e-commerce. And yeah, it's certainly retail. Like people spend a shit ton on hotels and hospitality. So like there's been a lot of things, or when you make a reservation online, or when you pay, when you order online at like a physical restaurant. I think the boundaries between what is e-commerce and what isn't is relatively blurred. Like honestly, having lived in Japan, I would much rather commerce be physical. In a world where all the buildings are houses and office buildings, or whatever, and then like everything gets ordered to your house and everything happens within people's houses. It's a disconnected world. I actually don't want to live in that world. Like that's not a awesome, brave new world to me. And in fact, there's been some negative effects in Japan. There's several causes to this, but the fashion scene in Japan, like people dress up in Japan a lot less than they did 20 years ago. And it was spectacular. Like I'm not even talking about the crazy fashion student kids that you see taking pictures, right? I'm talking about just regular people just dressed so snappily and cool. Like each person was very creative with their own outfit. That's a lot of that is gone, and some of that is falling wages. But some of that is just the shift to like everything is Instagram now. Like people don't care about dressing up for real world other people to see them. They just, they just wear stuff for the gram, or just look into a screen. And that's something has gone out of the world in that sense. And I don't feel like Instagram culture replaces it very well.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm definitely not saying it's a good thing, but I wonder if it will only continue to happen.
I think there's probably more scope for like SaaS productivity stuff to continue increasing like at a steady pace with remote work stuff. I think that, at first remote work is just you do the same work from your house, right? But I think that people will figure out how to reorganize businesses such that you have maybe like a whole lot of different employees doing smaller tasks, so like, instead of a whole bunch of people working 40-hour weeks, you have a whole bunch of part-timers working a few hours doing very specialized tasks from remotely. And then each of those people is doing it for 5 different companies. This is in a lot of sci-fi books. So like Rainbow's End, Werner Vinge's Rainbow's End, this is how people work. And I think there is that possibility. You could have business models that don't require full-time employees, that require fewer full-time employees and require a lot of the employees to just be hyper-specialized part-timers who are actually juggling between several jobs. That's how I have always liked to work myself. When I'm a worker, I've always wanted to juggle several things, several part-time things rather than have one full-time thing, because it just keeps things interesting. So maybe that could increase worker motivation. It could allow more dispersed stuff. So there's like lots of, and of course software would have to enable that. You'd need something better than Slack, because Slack, just allows coordination of teams within one organization. You'd need ways of coordinating across several. So I think that there's possibilities here. I just think that it's going to be more incremental.
We'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by WorkOS. If you're building a B2B SaaS app, at some point your customers will start asking for enterprise features like SAML authentication, SCIM provisioning, role-based access control, and audit trails. That's where WorkOS comes in, with easy-to-use and flexible APIs that help you ship enterprise features on day one without slowing down your core product development. Today, some of the hottest startups in the world are already powered by WorkOS, including ones you probably know, like Perplexity, Vercel, Jasper, and Webflow. WorkOS also provides a generous free tier of up to 1 million monthly active users for user management, making it the perfect authentication and authorization solution for growing companies. It comes standard with rich features like bot protection, MFA, roles and permissions, and more. If you are currently looking to build SSO for your first enterprise customer, you should consider using WorkOS. Integrate in minutes and start shipping enterprise plans today. Fast forward to the end of 2024. Think about your goals. What can you do right now to give yourself the best chance of succeeding? If learning a new language is on your list, you absolutely need to check out Babbel. Babbel offers a range of learning tools, self-study app lessons, live classes, and even podcasts, which have always been my favorite way to learn. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel isn't just a game to kill time and make you feel like you're learning a language. It's not overly academic or rigid either. It's all about learning language for the real world. Babbel stands out because it's designed by real people using a modern conversational teaching approach. It's not always easy, nothing worth doing ever is, but it's straightforward and designed to help you start speaking in just 3 weeks. With Babbel, I was able to brush up on my intermediate Spanish to ramp up for travel to Argentina last year, and was able to set clear goals based on how much time each week I wanted to practice. Join millions of Babbel language learners across all age groups. Here's a special limited time offer for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/econ102. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/econ102, spelled babbel.com/econ102. Rules and restrictions may apply.
It's really interesting to see where it's all going to go.
Yeah. I have questions about how, the people in the VC startup world are thinking about AI. You were talking about how like FANG is really well positioned. By the way, side note, love that we just kicked out Netflix and brought in NVIDIA and kept the acronym the same. It's still FANG. I mean, we had to make Facebook stay Facebook instead of going to Mang.
Well, yeah. Well, we can't have MAGA, so there needs to be an N in there.
And I mean, we've definitely got 2 A's in there. Or wait, we got 2 A's. MAGA. Yeah, well, you've got to have the N in there too.
Yeah, that's why we needed NVIDIA.
Manga.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Manga. How do people think about how are people thinking about how AI companies will make money? Like profit. Where are people thinking the money's going to come from right now? You talk to even more people than I do, and probably much more about this.
Right. Well, the other thing, so some people are bearish on VC investing in AI. They think that the models are going to capture a lot of the value, and that the models are already built. Or OpenAI, Anthropic, like those were the companies to be in. And if you didn't get into them, some people believe you kind of missed it. Not just because of how big the companies are going to be, because returns in venture stem not just from exit outcomes, the size of the exits, but also entry prices, and at what point you invest, at what valuation you invest. And there's been a flood of venture capital over the last decade because of low interest rates and a lot of just money looking for yield, but also because tech has done so well. And venture brands itself well. And so the venture class has exploded, which means that it's much more competitive, which means that founders are getting much higher valuations, which means that it's harder to get returns. And AI is where a lot of the dollars are going. And so everything is super expensive in AI.
Right. What do you make of the argument that a lot of this was dry powder from the boom? You know, every VC firm raised a ton of money in 2021. They deployed part of it, and those, some of those investments went bad, but then because of the bust. But a lot of it they didn't deploy yet. They just raised it. And yeah, they might not call some of it, but LPs get really mad and then decide they don't like you if you say, "Hey, about that 60 million you're going to give us." Well, I don't know what to do with that because I don't know things that are going on in tech. Nobody wants that. So there's this pressure. You don't have to call the capital, but there's this pressure to deploy because they essentially raising is a promise that you'll deploy. And now if generative AI is the only game in town, and deep tech, of course, but like if generative AI is the biggest growing thing, then everybody piles into that and the prices go way up just from sort of oversupply of capital. Like that's the argument I've heard from some people.
I think that's pretty accurate. And feedback loops for limited partners, the group of people that invest in venture capital firms, are really slow, like a decade slow or something like that. So it's going to take a long time for people to realize that we've overinvested. Also because there's such a power law in venture, which is the best firms do really well. And because the best firms do really well, everyone thinks they can be in the best firms. But most of the asset class doesn't do that well. And so they're like, oh yeah, I know everybody else is going to fail, but I'll be in the best firms. And so, but in terms of where's AI going to make money, I mean, I think a lot of people are excited for AI to kind of reinvent, most workflows or replace a lot of employees or replace a lot of spend. And so they're, looking at a lot of categories where people are just putting a lot of humans on the problem and saying, hey, could this be replaced with AI? Some people say AI is like we found a billion new interns and we get them for cheap. And where are areas where, a billion interns, and of course those interns will get smarter over time as the models get smarter, can replace human labor and take a fraction of that spend. So that's one of the areas that people are excited. But then also, a lot of the vertical applications that we talked about, sort of the doctor, the lawyer, Harvey is one of the more exciting AI companies at the moment, or at least has raised a lot. But yeah, those are just some examples.
And we should talk about this, but I'm pretty down on the idea that simply replacing humans with AI is actually going to be the most effective use of AI. And we can talk about that, but I guess there's an argument that if AI is going to transform all these businesses, then maybe the companies that benefit most from it will be the downstream industries like GM or Aflac, or, I'm just thinking of like some random companies out there in the world, like some housing developer or like Walmart or blah, blah, blah. If all these companies just start using AI, then the cost savings or profit improvements, whatever, maybe this just produces a boom in corporate America in general. And then, who in finance, who benefits from that is Vanguard and BlackRock.
Accenture. Yeah. A lot of these services.
Yeah. Yeah. And they themselves might be using AI and benefiting on that side too. And or maybe PE, right? Like PE companies can be like, I've just LBO'd your company and we're going to replace a bunch of people with AI. Like that would be what PE does. Like that is what they do. And so, yeah, maybe it could just cause a boom in all of corporate America. So for example, a good analogy here would be energy. So solar power, we figured out, this is true in China, this is true in America, this is true everywhere, that there's no profit in solar. It's a commoditized product, and yet it's incredibly important. Cheap electricity will allow so many people to do so many things, but because solar is so commoditized, the panel manufacturers aren't going to capture a lot of that. And so you invest in some startup that has a better thing, blah, blah, and once in a while it works and everyone copies it, and then you make no money. And then usually what happens is it just doesn't work and you make no money anyway. So there's no money. Like capital gets deployed, but it's very, very low return. And that's why China's doing better at it, because China doesn't care about returns. We're like, where's the profit in selling this? And yet the profit's all downstream. So you need vertical integration, right? Or you need a China that just says like, thou shalt invest. But like, right. But vertical integration is the key. Companies that benefit from cheap electricity will have to simply pay for the installation of the solar And so we're going to need those companies to like, and utilities, there'll be government capital, blah, blah, blah. We can talk about that later. But the point is that ultimately, maybe AI is like that in the sense that maybe even OpenAI and Anthropic won't ultimately make that much money because ultimately LLM is a commoditized product, right? Like any big model is as good as any other big model. GPT is about as good as Claude, which is about as good as Llama, which, and then you can have a like 90% as good thing just on your phone with some open source thing that some kids made at Stanford, right? And maybe that's the future. And then it's just commoditized like solar. And then nobody makes any profit on it except for the people who use it, who get to, now do a whole bunch of stuff they couldn't do before, just like with solar and cheap energy. And so maybe that's the future. Maybe all the people who make the money are the downstream people. Like cement. Who makes a bunch of money on cement?
Right. Well, yeah, it's interesting. I think the question is, yeah, will it become a commodity? Because if you get the 90% or as good, then the question is like, how important is that 10%? And is that like a main differentiator? And I think that.
Sure. Okay, forget about the 10%, forget about the 90% guy that the Stanford kids made. Just think about building a big model. Like the data is all the same. And we have not seen a lot of companies have durable moats based on algorithmic software. There's very few companies, PageRank was easy for Bing to copy. Why did Google keep their network effect? Why did they keep their monopoly? Because they had all the data and Bing didn't, right? Bing didn't have as many advertisers, so it couldn't tell what people wanted to see, so it couldn't improve its search algorithm beyond the basic PageRank idea. PageRank was not a durable source of a moat or profit for Google. And so, it was just what helped them get into the market and get some attention. It was good. It was a great innovation. It was really productive, important algorithmic innovation to rank websites based on how other websites link to them. But that kind of thing by itself has not tended to make a lot of profit. And the exceptions are when you create your own like language that you then lock into with a hardware provider. So for example, CUDA, like you could call that an algorithm, but that makes money because it makes everyone buy your chip designs instead of the other guy's chip designs that everyone uses CUDA. But anyway, so I don't even know if that's properly called an algorithm anyway, but I guess the point is that it hasn't been that hard for Llama to get something as good as OpenAI, as GPT or Claude. Right? Maybe not exactly as good, but like the differences in these, I wouldn't be able to, like the differences between them change from day to day. Like which of these is better depends on the day. And so I don't think any of them is clearly just superior to the other. But look how easy it was to get a 3 companies that could do this just about equally as well. Well, Apple hasn't even gotten in that game yet, right? And I guess Google has Gemini. Would you say Gemini's as good, or are they behind?
No, not yet. But they could catch up.
They could do it as long as when they get bored with like making pictures of like black Nazis, then they'll catch up. And when they actually figure out how to assign Googlers to actually do work again.
Yeah.
Like Google has become r/anti-work, right? When they figure out how to solve that, Google fire like 70% of your people.
You were talking earlier about people having multiple jobs, and I was going to say r/overemployed. Like the future is already here.
All the Googlers in the audience, I'm kidding.
Yes, exactly.
Google's fine. They'll be great. But then like, I'm just being snarky for fun. But no, like, yeah, it's easy to do. And like, what if, OpenAI doesn't have that big a team, and there's a lot of people who know how to do AI out there. And what if, what's another big company? What if Bloomberg wants to make an AI as good as Llama? What if JP Morgan Chase decides to get into this game? What if, Tesla, I guess XAI, might be as good. Like that's essentially, because Elon is pulling money from Tesla, it's essentially just Tesla and SpaceX or wherever he's pulling money out of. Like it's duplicating the effort of these other guys. And then like, and then plus you could have venture funded things. And so like, where's the moat there on those foundations?
I don't think JP Morgan's going to be, I think it's going to be like self-driving cars where, yeah, the self-driving cars where the incumbents will have the Googles, the Apples, they'll be able to compete, but there will be startup, OpenAI is like the Tesla of self-driving cars. But I think, there's how many people how many good researchers are there actually?
But Tesla's definitely not the leader in self-driving cars at all.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I agree. So I think incumbents will be the
because Google uses LiDAR to get a whole shit ton of private data that Tesla doesn't have. Tesla's like model only.
yeah.
And then like Google has LiDAR private data, but like for LLMs, all the data is public. It's all on the web. You just scrape the web.
Right, but the LLMs are not the last innovation here, right? And the field is continuing to advance. And at some point in the next decade, I don't know, a few years, we'll figure out. Like, I guess if we had hit the limit of research, if LLMs were the last innovation, I agree, everyone would catch up. But whatever's next in terms of innovation, it's likely going to be figured out by people working at one of these companies, right? OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta. It's not going to be Goldman Sachs, right? And so that's why I think like the leading companies, which might be incumbents to your point. It might be Meta, it might be Google, it might be, if Apple ever decides to play it a serious way, but it also could be OpenAI or it could be Anthropic. And I think that's why people are still excited about those companies.
Right. But what do we think? Why do we think there'll be one durable winner in this space? What will provide the durability of that win? I mean, okay, let me expand on that question. OpenAI was the clear winner for, I would say, 9 months to a year. Nothing came close to GPT. Now many things come close to GPT, or in the case of Claude Sonnet, maybe even exceed GPT in performance. And it was very ephemeral, very fleeting, and yet tens of billions of dollars were spent. Tens of billions or just billions? I don't know how much they've actually spent total.
A lot of money.
Yeah. A lot of money was spent, and OpenAI had a big advantage for a year, and now whoever has the advantage has only a tiny advantage. What makes us think that there's any lasting advantage to having the best foundational model at a point in time?
It's possible brand matters, right? Like ChatGPT, maybe the fastest growing product of all time. Some people associate AI with ChatGPT, and even if these other models catch up, maybe just that brand sort of power is just where people go, and thus businesses want to partner with them, and all the integrations, and they just create this flywheel that might be hard to compete with in the same way that even if Bing got as good as Google, would people go to Bing?
A business side developer ecosystem building proprietary apps on top of their platform would be similar to like how Apple locked people in or whatever. Because if developing for GPT meant couldn't develop for Claude, right? If you can only develop for stuff for GPT, then that would be like a two-sided network effect, right? So maybe I don't actually know the details of how well that works, because on software platforms are very distinct, right? The APIs are very different. I don't know how different these APIs are for like Claude, and like what would be the switching cost if you're an app developer who's developing something that's using this. The thing is that is it a two-sided network effect? Because no, I think it's not, because like on one side you only have brand loyalty. I guess if there's a whole lot of apps you want to use that use GPT, you stick within that app ecosystem, and the apps are all GPT based. But I don't know. So far, GPT's been enough of a general purpose technology where every wrapper has not had that much. Like the idea of a foundational model's value so far has not come from people building anything on top of it, including character AI. Which can we come up with a new name for like this kind of like non-acquisition raid bullshit that just happened? Because like that sucked. Like that's like not even an acqui-hire. That's like an aquafire. Maybe that's the name. Aquafire. Like they laid off half the company, took the people they thought were better, and then just left the actual company's brand just to die.
Employees the employees that stayed, I believe, did make 2.5x their investment or something, and investors got 2.5x.
Now you're an investor who's out of a job.
Yes.
I mean, you have a job, but like now Google stood up a competing product with the original team to just like compete with you. And then like the old brand is just abandoned. This is very different than what Google normally does, where they acquire you and then let the brand slowly die. Man, I am beating up on Google so much. I bet we have like 10 million Googlers in our audience, and they're just like, well, fuck you, Google's great. Well, okay, but I did not like the way they did that with character AI. I thought that was That's not going to be a good model for the industry going forward.
I agree, but I think Lena Khan also bears some responsibility for creating sort of the environment where that's needed. We also have, I'm sure, OpenAI and Anthropic listeners who are saying, no, there is a moat, or people who work in it. And maybe we'll have to have one on our show at some point to explain. But
someone from one of those companies, we know like a ton of the people there, so we should just get one. But they're all very secretive. Like I know the Anthropic people are a little less secretive. I think maybe someone from Anthropic will come. Maybe let's get Dario. Maybe Dario will come on our podcast.
That'd be amazing. Yeah. I want to focus on something else that you mentioned in the piece, because you mentioned, hey, there's a reason why that this might explain why some tech people are becoming more conservative, or it might portend for the tech industry to become more conservative. And I think so too. And some people say it's because, hey, Elon bought Twitter, or because journalists were mean to tech people, or the Democratic establishment wasn't super friendly. I think that's a little part of it. I think another part of it is that, investors and founders used to work in fields that didn't touch the government. But we just said consumer social is mature. A lot of the social internet is mature. And so now everything that they work on or invest in, or almost everything, or much more, touches the government in some way, whether it's healthcare, whether it's fintech, whether it's energy, whether it's crypto, whether it's we're talking about regulating AI to some degree, ed tech, biotech, people all kinds of hard tech. And so now startups have to become, and investors have to become savvy about how government works. Everyone's got to be their own lobbyist, or start lobbying for their industry. And that's another reason why they are gravitating towards the party that, or in theory, or maybe in previous administrations, has been less regular, is more deregulatory. And so I think that's just an understated reason why the tech industry is becoming more conservative, because they're having to face more regulated industries, and they kind of have the same complaint, which as Recline and other the abundance folks have too, which is everything bagel liberalism. There's just too much regulations.
Well, right. Everything bagel liberalism is more about stuff the government tries to do and then holds itself back from doing. But yes, that's absolutely right. So I think that's an inevitable shift. The inevitable shift of mature industries to focusing on from focusing on growth to focusing on efficiency. That's an inevitable shift. True for countries too. But yeah, so like as you need, as your opportunities for just like growing, hyper growth dry up, you're more proportionally more of your alpha will come from lower taxes, lower regulation, and just more pro-business policies in general. And so that, of course, will push people. That's an eternal thing. Like business, there will always be someone who offers like deregulation of business. Of course, the Democrats could capture that, but they're not in the mood to do that. They're in the mood for antitrust and derailing. That may change, right? Like, Mark Andreessen was a big Democratic donor back in the days of Bill Clinton, because honestly, Bill Clinton was the bigger deregulator. And I don't know that that's what was pushing Mark to do it. I'd have to ask him, but the point is that
he supported Hillary.
He did support Hillary. And like the Democrats were very deregulatory for a while. And then Bernie came and the Democrats like, oh, okay, we need to bash companies, bash billionaires. So yeah, I think that's absolutely right. It's weird that, and I use that term deliberately. It's weird that has manifested by watching a few tech people. Now you do have the 100 like VCs for Harris and all that stuff, but it's weird that you've seen a few tech people embrace a political movement on the right whose two big policy ideas are deportation of immigrants and immigration restriction and tariffs. Like if you really want, you're a bit, the tech is a business that depends crucially on high skilled immigration. You cut that off and tech just vaporizes, right? It's like you've just cut off a third of your skilled people and all of your agglomeration effects. And then at that point, tech heads for the exits. Like that's like when the Nazis kicked out all the Jews and suddenly like, oops, your scientific supremacy has just been eroded. It didn't kill all their scientific supremacy. There were tons of good non-Jewish scientists there. A majority of the good scientists were not Jews, obviously, but there were enough. It was enough of a change that really hurt them a lot. And so, Trump has focused his fire entirely on like illegal immigrants rhetorically, but in practice, it's a lot easier to get rid of high skilled immigrants than illegal immigrants because high-skilled immigrants obey the rules, so you can just say goodbye or don't come. Like, so it's a lot easier. And Stephen Miller and the other guys who run immigration policy for Trump, they just want to keep out anybody, anybody. Like, and so it's weird to see tech people embrace that. There's other reasons there. And I gave a whole bunch of reasons in my other post, but I think that, yes, this is a story for why tech is going to be pushed in a more conservative direction. But it's not the whole story for what they did with the sudden embrace of Trump. I think that was more of a slightly mistimed bet on what felt like a winning horse. After Trump did his little assassination attempt photo, right? And then they were like, oh, this guy's got it. He's got it in the bag. We got to be on this train. Otherwise, we won't have a voice in the new administration that's definitely going to win in November. And then suddenly Kamala Harris turns out to be good at campaigning. The hell? How'd that happen? Suddenly, it's one of the sudden Deus Ex Machina reversals in a movie. And now the tech people who are all in for Trump are they're going to have to learn to love blaming everything on immigration now, because otherwise you can't just say Trump is a winner, we're with the winner. You've got to have more fundamental reasons to support Trump. And so that's put them in a difficult position. I don't envy their dinner conversation.
Yeah, the dynamic has certainly changed ever since Kamala took over. I mean, it is crazy that the first Biden-Trump debate has to be one of the most significant debates of all time if Kamala ends up winning the election.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it's still a very close election. I think it's wrong to call Trump the front runner anymore, but I'd say that Kamala is slightly front running in various forecasts and betting markets, but I'd say it's pretty even, right? Good chance Trump could still be president and those bets will still look very good, but people have got to be biting their fingernails here or knuckles or whatever people bite when they're nervous. I don't know. Biting their phones. Do people do that?
Yeah, it is interesting. We'll see how much the vibe shift or the return vibe shift will last. I wonder how Kamala will do in the swing states. I know she's pulling well, but I just can't get over the fact that she was very unpopular as VP and that she has to win over swing states.
She was unpopular as VP, but also no one cared or ever thought about her. She was a non-entity. And there's a big...
So you're saying she's getting a fresh start?
Yes, she's getting a fresh start. Democrats are so much more motivated and whatever. And Trump is old. He's an old guy. And Biden's oldness, Biden's even greater oldness, I'm sure there's a more elegant way to say that, but Biden's even greater oldness masked Trump's oldness, right? And now it's unmasked. And you see him he just sort of stuttered and slurred his way through that interview yesterday. By the way, I didn't actually listen to that, so people told me that he did. But I watch his speeches, I watch videos of his speeches sometimes, and he does sort of ramble, stutter, and stutter, he's visibly aging. And populist movements tend not to be as popular the second time out. It's not always true, but it is true of Bernie, and it was true of George Wallace, and it was true of Ralph Nader, and it was true of, who else? So many other people, like a Ross Perot, right? Or it's true, just the second time out, people just sort of walked away. Trump depends on this very high turnout, very high engagement. He's the high turnout president. When turnout is high, Trump does well. When turnout is low, Democrats do well because politically engaged people lean more Democratic than politically disengaged people. Then, of course, this punctures the Democrats' self-image of themselves as the party of the masses. They're not. But they are the party of the majority of highly engaged people. Yes, they are. And so and that's new. That's within the last 20 years. It used to be the opposite, right? It used to be when Democrats were the working class party, the party of, unions and workers and the poor and whatever, then they would benefit from high turnout. And they haven't realized yet that they're the low turnout party now because they're the party of just educated, liberal dorks like me.
and this dynamic shifts every few decades. Is that right?
It's not clear. It's not clear whether it shifts. But I mean, so I guess, yeah, it's we've only had really good...
Or the working class dynamic of the party of the working class.
Yeah. Democrats were the party of the working class for all of the 20th century. That lasted a century. But then Democrats were the party of black people only since the big shift after FDR. So that happened after FDR. Before that, Republicans were the party of black people because of slavery and all that stuff. And then, so that was a big shift. Democrats were the party of Southerners, and now Republicans are the party of Southern whites. And now Republicans are that party. And so you do get big shifts there. Democrats are always the party of immigrants, by the way, going back to the founding of America. That's the one thing that's never shifted is Democrats have been the party of immigrants, Republicans have not, or even the Federalists and Whigs were not.
But but I thought Bernie Sanders was, or I thought there was some, the labor left, weren't they against?
Cesar Chavez was he was like the most anti-immigration guy you ever met, right? He would just rail against the like quote unquote wetbacks. Like he would just like yell, go on rants about these guys because he felt that they were threatening his, Mexican American farm workers were being threatened by Mexican farm workers. So he thought that. And so he would go on these big rants and yeah, no, there was tons of immigration restriction, but yet at the same time, like more recent descendants of immigrants would tend to vote Democrat in those days as well. And that was before the big Mexican wave too. So a lot of the more recent descendant of immigrants were descendants of European immigrants at that time in the 70s, right? And yeah, so Democrats have always been the party of immigrants, and Republicans have always been worried that Democrats are importing votes. Like you can go back to the early 1800s and see Republicans just freaking out. Like before the Republicans existed, you can see Federalists and Whigs freaking out, right? Over the Democrats importing votes. And as soon as the Republicans become a thing, they are afraid of the Democrats importing votes. And so you had this one gasp of like pro-immigration radical Republicans right after the Civil War, like became very like pro-open borders. Like, yeah, open borders. But then like that lasted maybe 10 to 15 years. And then it snapped back where the Democrats became the party of immigrants again. Because I don't know why. But then when you see people being like the great replacement theory, this is the oldest idea in American politics. We are a nation of immigrants will always have a lot of people who worry about the immigrants replacing them. And we always have. And so anyway, that's a rant unconnected to the tech industry or whatever else we were talking about.
No, but it's maybe a good place to wrap because we're over time. But this has been a great conversation, and yeah, maybe it'll be a segue. The immigrant stuff maybe be a segue to Europe. Maybe we'll get into that at some point because there's a lot happening there. But
you made me more pessimistic about VC in this podcast and startup.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like you actually made me more pessimistic about I was like, well, things are going to get harder now that you don't have the internet, and you're just like, nobody has a moat. The big companies are going to capture everything. You're more pessimistic than I am. Maybe that's just how you came across. Maybe you're playing devil's advocate.
I'm more optimistic on incumbents than I am on VC. I think there will be more Snaps, more Ubers, $50 billion to $100 billion companies. But I don't know if we're going to see a new $1 trillion company start now, in the next 10 to 15 years. I think the big companies already exist. The best VCs are still going to do well, but in the 90s and 2000s, we had a few companies start that are either worth $1 trillion today or going to be worth $1 trillion, and that era might be over. But we'll have to bring on a super techno optimist like Balaji or someone else at some point who can or be a VC optimist too.
Let's bring on a VC optimist. Let's see who from VC wants to come and just say like VC is going to be awesome.
Yeah, that'd be a good conversation. No, as always, great conversation. Until next time.
Until next time.
Econ 102 is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, In the Arena, The Cognitive Revolution, and more. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a review in the App Store. You can keep up with both of our Substacks for written analysis of the topics we cover in the show at noahopinion.substack.com and eriktorenberg.substack.com. Thanks for listening.